I begged my husband to take me to the hospital while in labor. He refused, and I haven't forgiven him since. Hi, everyone. Our daughter is now 8 weeks old, so obviously this whole argument has gone on a very, very long time. We both have been holding grudges, and neither of us think that we are wrong. My husband does not know I am posting this, so I am going to keep it as anonymous as possible. So, when I got pregnant with my daughter, my husband started in immediately telling me that I should have a home birth. I really do not know why he was so adamant on it, but he was. At first, I brushed him off and told him I would think about it because I was only 6 weeks pregnant, and the birth seemed so far off. Of course, it came quickly, and my husband would literally speak over me at doctor's appointments when my doctor would ask if I had a birth plan. This caused a few arguments between us in those 39 weeks of pregnancy, but I never really changed my mind. Eventually, my husband's mother sat down and talked to me, and she told me all of the reasons why they did not want me to go to a hospital for the birth. I expressed my concerns about, safety of the baby and myself, but just like my husband, she brushed me off. I ended up telling my husband that I would take myself to the hospital when it was time, and that I did not want a home birth. He acted as if he didn't hear me. We met with a doula who was also very pushy. I felt overwhelmed and not supported at all. I was 36 weeks at that point. So when I went into labor, I was 39 weeks, and I begged, absolutely begged my husband to take me to the hospital where my doctor is. He wouldn't. He spoke to me condescendingly and called the doula instead. I was in labor for about 3 days, active labor for around the last 22 hours. I cried the whole time. I just felt something was wrong. I was scared, and oftentimes they left me alone. The doula told me that if active pushing and labor reached 24 hours, I had to go into the hospital. I remember thinking that I could not decide which was worse, staying in labor for another 2 hours or having my baby right there. When she was finally out, I don't even remember wanting to hold her. I just remember crying out of relief. Obviously, I am okay now, but I did not have a good experience. On my first appointment after birth with my doctor, she was very shocked I had the baby. She was concerned. I was so upset. I told my husband that he absolutely ruined it for me. I truly never want to go through that again. I hear mothers say that they forget all the pain the second they have the baby, but I didn't. I love my daughter so much, but it was horrible, and it was entirely his fault. So I told him that several times. He rolls his eyes every time and tells me how mothers are strong and how I am not trying to be strong. I told him that if we ever have another baby, which he wants, that I will never do a home birth ever again. His response is, "We'll see." I cannot possibly be TA here, can I? Everyone around me is acting like this is so normal, but it's not. Is it? Update 1. Hi again, everyone. I really didn't expect to be writing this update so soon, but I need to get this off my chest. Things have been tense here, and I feel like I'm slowly losing myself. First, I want to thank everyone for the outpouring of support and advice. It was comforting to know that I wasn't alone in feeling the way I did, and it gave me the courage to start standing up for myself. Unfortunately, things have only gotten worse since my last post. After the birth of our daughter, I was completely overwhelmed. You'd think that having a baby would bring two people closer, but for us, it felt like it drove an even bigger wedge between us. My husband and I couldn't stop arguing. Everything was a battle. From the smallest things, like how to dress her, to the bigger issues, like how to deal with the birth trauma I was still processing. Every time I brought up the way he had handled the whole situation, he would shut me down. His go-to response was to roll his eyes and tell me I was being dramatic, that I needed to get over it, and that childbirth was supposed to be painful. It was infuriating. The worst part is, I started questioning myself. Was I being too emotional? Was I making too big a deal out of this? I've always prided myself on being a strong person, but this was different. I felt like I was slowly losing the ability to stand up for myself, and the more I tried, the harder he pushed back. He'd keep insisting that I didn't try hard enough to see things from his perspective, which just seemed absurd. I mean, wasn't it my body? My pain? Shouldn't my opinion matter? Then, something happened that really threw me. It was a Saturday morning, and I was trying to talk to him again about what had happened during the birth. I tried to explain how unsafe I had felt, how isolated and scared I was during labor, and how I couldn't forget that fear, no matter how much time had passed. He just sighed, shaking his head like I was a petulant child, and said, "You should have trusted me. If you trusted me, none of this would be an issue." Trust. There it was again. He kept coming back to this idea that my problem was trust, as if my trauma had nothing to do with his actions, but everything to do with my supposed inability to trust him. I wanted to scream. How could he not see that my trust in him had been shattered by the way he ignored my pleas during labor? I was begging him to take me to the hospital, and he acted like I was a hysterical child. I tried to tell him how I felt, but all he cared about was pushing his own agenda, making decisions for me without even considering my input. At that point, I knew we needed help. I couldn't keep living like this, feeling like I was screaming into the void every time I tried to explain my pain. So, I suggested therapy. I had been thinking about it for a while, but I was hesitant because I knew how my husband felt about involving other people in our personal lives. But this wasn't just about us anymore. We had a daughter to think about. I didn't want her to grow up in a household full of tension, where her parents barely spoke to each other, and when they did, it was always an argument. To my surprise, he agreed. At first, I didn't think he was serious, but he actually sat down and looked into therapists with me. For a moment, I felt hopeful. Maybe this was the turning point we needed. Maybe we could finally start communicating and working through everything. We started therapy the following week, and it was awkward at first. He wasn't used to being so open, and I could tell he was uncomfortable. But we kept going, and slowly, things started to come out. I began to see a different side of him, one that was more vulnerable than I had ever imagined. He admitted that he felt overwhelmed during the pregnancy and birth, and that he didn't know how to handle the situation. He confessed that his mother had been pushing him to ensure we had a home birth, and that he didn't want to disappoint her. That revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just about him, it was about her, too. His mother had always been a little too involved in our lives, but I didn't realize just how much influence she had over him. He was trying to please her, and in doing so, he completely ignored my needs. I felt a mixture of anger and sadness. How could he prioritize his mother's wishes over my safety and well-being? That night, after the therapy session, I confronted him about it. I told him I was furious that he had let his mother's opinions dictate our lives, especially something as monumental as the birth of our child. He apologized, but it felt hollow. It felt like he was saying what he thought I wanted to hear, rather than actually understanding the depth of my hurt. We've continued therapy, but I can't shake the feeling that we're not addressing the real issue. Yes, his mother's influence is a problem, but the deeper issue is that he fundamentally doesn't seem to value my voice in our relationship. He still doesn't seem to understand that what happened during the birth was traumatic for me, and that his dismissal of my feelings is damaging our relationship. I'm at a crossroads. Part of me wants to keep fighting for our marriage, for the sake of our daughter, but another part of me wonders if I'm fighting a losing battle. Can we ever truly move past this if he doesn't fully understand the depth of my pain? Is there a way to rebuild trust after it's been shattered so completely? I'm trying to stay hopeful, but it's hard. Right now, I'm just taking it one day at a time. Therapy is helping me process my feelings, but I don't know if it's enough to save us. I love my husband, but I don't know if I can continue to live in a marriage where my voice doesn't matter. I want to believe that things can get better, but I'm not sure how long I can keep holding on. Update 2. Since my last update, things have gotten even more complicated. We've been going to therapy for about a month now, and while it seemed like we were making progress at first, the deeper we go, the more cracks are beginning to show. I've started noticing things about my husband that I didn't see before, or maybe I did, but I just didn't want to acknowledge them. In one of our recent sessions, I brought up the birth again, specifically how he and his mother had made decisions about my body without consulting me. Our therapist asked him how he felt about my concerns, and for the first time, he admitted that he didn't think I could handle the birth. He said, "I thought you were too emotional, too scared to make the right decision." Hearing those words from his mouth made my stomach drop. He didn't think I was capable of deciding what was best for me and our child. All this time, I had been telling myself that he was misguided, or maybe under pressure from his mother. But in reality, he just didn't trust me to make the right decisions. That revelation hit me harder than I expected. I sat there in silence for a few minutes, trying to process what he had just said. He didn't think I was capable of making decisions about my own body and our baby. All this time, I thought we were dealing with a communication issue, but it was much deeper than that. It was about control and trust. He didn't see me as an equal partner in our relationship. After that session, I couldn't even look at him. I was so angry, hurt, and confused. How could he, the person I chose to spend my life with, think so little of me? I confronted him later that night, and what followed was one of the worst arguments we've ever had. I told him that his lack of trust and respect for me was destroying our marriage, and he fired back, saying that I was blowing everything out of proportion. He accused me of holding onto the past and not wanting to move forward. But how could I move forward when the very foundation of our relationship, trust, was so broken? He said that I was trying to paint him as the villain, that I wasn't acknowledging the pressure he was under from his mother, and the responsibility he felt to ensure the birth went smoothly. But I couldn't let that excuse his actions. Yes, he might have been under pressure, but that didn't give him the right to dismiss my fears and concerns. The argument ended with me telling him that if things didn't change, I wasn't sure if I could stay in this marriage. He looked shocked, like he couldn't believe I would even consider leaving him. But how could I stay in a relationship where I felt so small, so powerless? I didn't want our daughter to grow up thinking that this was what a healthy relationship looked like. In the days following that argument, my husband's attitude shifted. He became quieter, more withdrawn. I could tell he was thinking about what I had said, but he didn't bring it up again. Instead, he started spending more time with his mother. He would visit her almost every day, and when he came home, he was distant. I tried to talk to him, but he would shut me down, telling me he needed time to think. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I had a sinking feeling that his mother was once again influencing him. She had always been a looming presence in our marriage, but now it felt like she was actively pulling him away from me. I overheard a phone conversation between them one day, and I could tell they were talking about me. His mother was telling him that I was too emotional and that I needed to be more understanding of him. I felt like I was being gaslit, like my feelings and experiences were being completely invalidated. It became clear to me that I was not only fighting for my marriage, but also fighting against his mother's influence. She had always been manipulative, but now it felt like she was actively trying to drive a wedge between us, and my husband was letting her. He wasn't standing up for me or our relationship. Instead, he was retreating into the safety of his mother's control. One night, after another therapy session that went nowhere, I decided to have a serious conversation with him. I told him that things couldn't continue like this. I needed to know where he stood. Was he going to prioritize our marriage and our family? Or was he going to keep letting his mother interfere in our lives? His response shocked me. He told me that he didn't know if he could give me what I was asking for. He said he felt torn between me and his mother, and he wasn't sure how to handle it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could he not see that his loyalty should be with me and our daughter, not his mother? I told him that if he couldn't make a decision, I would make it for him. That night, I packed a bag for me and our daughter and went to stay with my sister. I needed space to think, and I needed him to understand that I was serious. I wasn't going to stay in a marriage where I was constantly second to his mother. I needed to protect myself and my daughter from the toxic dynamic that was playing out in our relationship. While staying with my sister, I started to realize just how much of myself I had lost in this marriage. I had spent so much time trying to please my husband and his family that I had forgotten about my own needs and desires. I had been walking on eggshells for so long, trying not to upset anyone, that I hadn't even realized how much of my own happiness I had sacrificed. I started therapy on my own, and it was eye-opening. I realized that I had been enabling my husband's behavior by not setting clear boundaries with him and his mother. I had let their needs and opinions dictate my life for too long. It was time for me to reclaim my own power and start making decisions that were best for me and my daughter. After a week of staying with my sister, my husband called me. He sounded different. He was quieter, more reflective. He told me that he had been thinking a lot about our last conversation and that he wanted to talk. We agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop where we could have a calm, rational conversation without the tension of being at home. When we sat down, he looked exhausted. He admitted that he had been wrong. He said that he hadn't realized how much his mother's influence had affected our marriage and that he was willing to set boundaries with her. He apologized for dismissing my feelings during the birth and admitted that he should have listened to me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like he was being genuine. I could see the regret in his eyes, and it felt like he was finally starting to understand the depth of my pain. But I wasn't ready to forgive him just yet. Words were one thing, but I needed to see real change. I told him that I was willing to try and work things out, but only if he showed me that he was serious about making things better. That meant setting clear boundaries with his mother, prioritizing our marriage, and going to therapy, both individually and as a couple. He agreed, but I could tell he was nervous. Change wasn't going to be easy for him, especially with his mother's grip on him. I went back home that night, but things are still very much up in the air. We're in a fragile place, and I'm not sure what the future holds. I want to believe that we can get through this, but I've also learned that I need to prioritize my own well-being and my daughter's. This is the beginning of a long journey, and I know there will be more challenges ahead. I just hope that this time we can face them together as equals, without the shadow of his mother looming over us. Update 3. It's been about 6 months since I last updated, and I'm still processing everything that has happened since then. Things have been a roller coaster, to say the least. My husband and I continued therapy, and for a while it seemed like we were making real progress. He was more attentive, more present, and he even started standing up to his mother. He set clear boundaries with her, which was a huge step for him, and I could tell it wasn't easy. At first, I was cautiously optimistic. My husband seemed like he was finally understanding how much his actions had hurt me and how much control his mother had over our lives. He even agreed to stop seeing the doula, who had continued to be a strange and unwelcome presence in our lives, constantly checking in on him rather than me. Things felt like they were moving in the right direction. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could work through this. But deep down, I was still on guard, not fully convinced that these changes were permanent. For a few months, things were relatively calm. My husband and I were communicating better, and I felt like we were reconnecting. He was more involved with our daughter, which gave me a glimmer of hope. We even started talking about the future again, plans for our daughter's first birthday, ideas for a family vacation, and how we could strengthen our marriage moving forward. It was a relief to finally feel like we were on the same page. But then, things started to unravel again. It began subtly at first. My husband would be late coming home from work, and when I asked him where he had been, he'd give vague answers. I didn't think much of it at first, chalking it up to him needing some space or extra time to clear his head after work. After everything we'd been through, I figured he might need some time to process things on his own. But as the weeks went on, the late nights became more frequent. I could tell something was off, but every time I tried to bring it up, he would brush it aside, saying I was being paranoid or overthinking things. The communication we had worked so hard to rebuild was slowly starting to break down again. One evening, I decided to check his phone while he was in the shower. I know, it's a huge breach of trust, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on. As soon as I unlocked his phone, my heart dropped. There were text messages between him and his mother, messages that made it clear she was still meddling in our lives behind the scenes. They were discussing decisions about our daughter's future, schools, activities, and even whether we should move closer to her without consulting me at all. It felt like a punch to the gut. But what hurt the most was a message from his mother that said, "You know, she'll never be good enough for you. I've been telling you that since the beginning. You'll eventually see it too." And the worst part? He didn't disagree. He didn't defend me. Instead, his reply was simply, "I know, but I don't know what to do anymore." I felt like I had been slapped in the face. After everything we'd been through, after all the therapy and the promises to set boundaries with his mother, he was still letting her undermine our relationship. Worse yet, he seemed to agree with her. I confronted him that night. I didn't even try to keep my composure. I just let it all out. I told him how betrayed I felt, how hurt I was that he was still allowing his mother to have this much influence over our lives. He tried to defend himself, saying that he was just trying to keep the peace, that he didn't want to upset anyone. But it was too late. The damage had been done. I told him that I couldn't keep doing this, that I couldn't stay in a marriage where I felt like I was constantly fighting for his attention and respect. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat there, staring at the floor, looking completely defeated. After what felt like an eternity of silence, he finally spoke. He told me that he was sorry, that he knew he had messed up, but he wasn't sure how to fix things. He said that he felt trapped between me and his mother, and no matter what he did, he felt like he was disappointing someone. For the first time, I realized just how deep his issues with his mother really ran. It wasn't just about her being overbearing or controlling. It was about him not knowing how to set boundaries, how to be his own person. He had spent his entire life trying to please her, and now he didn't know how to live without her constant approval. And as much as I hated to admit it, I realized that maybe this wasn't something he could change. I told him that I needed space to think. I packed a bag for me and our daughter and went to stay with my sister again. I didn't know if this was the end of our marriage, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep fighting for a place in my own family. Over the next few weeks, my husband tried to reach out to me, but I kept my distance. I needed time to figure out what I wanted, and more importantly, what I deserved. I continued therapy on my own, and I started to see just how much I had been sacrificing for this relationship. I had been putting my own needs and happiness on the back burner for so long, trying to make things work with someone who wasn't fully invested in our marriage. It was a painful realization, but it was also empowering. After about a month of separation, I made the decision to file for divorce. It wasn't an easy choice, but I knew it was the right one. I deserved to be with someone who saw me as an equal, someone who respected me and valued my opinion. My husband might have loved me in his own way, but he wasn't capable of giving me the partnership I needed. And as much as it hurt, I had to accept that. When I told him about the divorce, he was devastated. He begged me to reconsider, saying that he would try harder, that he would finally set boundaries with his mother. But it was too little, too late. I had given him so many chances, and he had let me down every time. I couldn't keep waiting for him to change. The divorce process was painful, but ultimately, it was a relief. I felt like I was finally taking control of my life again, like I was reclaiming my own happiness. My daughter and I moved into a new apartment, and while it's been an adjustment, we're doing okay. I'm focusing on being the best mom I can be, and I'm learning how to prioritize my own needs for the first time in a long time. As for my ex-husband, I hear from him occasionally. He's still in therapy, and he's trying to rebuild his life without his mother's constant influence. I hope he finds peace, but I've come to terms with the fact that his journey is separate from mine now. Looking back, I realize that this whole experience has taught me so much about myself, about my strength, my resilience, and my worth. I'm not the same person I was when this all started, and for that, I'm grateful. It was a long and painful road, but I've come out the other side stronger and more confident in who I am and what I deserve. I'm sharing this update because I want anyone else going through a similar situation to know that it's okay to prioritize yourself. It's okay to demand respect and equality in your relationship, and it's okay to walk away if you're not getting it. You deserve to be with someone who values you for who you are, not who they want you to be. And most importantly, you deserve to be happy.